These free effective communication skills training course videos brought to you by communication expert keynote speaker Dan O'Connor.
The first thing that I would like to talk to you about this week is public speaking. It's one of the hottest topics around. And did you know that it's one of the top skills that can help you succeed in business? The CEO of General Electric was interviewed and he was asked, what is the most important skill that an executive can have to help him or her succeed in business? And his answer surprised me. It was public speaking. And I thought, well, most people aren't public speakers and most people don't even do public speaking, whether or not they're a successful executive. And his point was, when it comes time to speak in public, whether it's to give a presentation or to give a speech or whatever it may be, those people that can do it well and do it confidently and project an image of confidence and power as they do it are those who people notice and who people think of as powerful, strong communicators that they can trust to get the job done. And I thought, let's talk about that. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is an introduction. Most people, when they begin public speaking, don't focus on their opening lines and their closing lines when they give public speeches. We know whether it's an address or whatever it may be. And that is one of the most important parts about your speech. When you are about to give an address or give a presentation, remember your opening line is key. So the first strategy that I'd like to talk to you about today is the opening line.
Well, good morning, everybody.
What's with this guy? Jeez.
Thank you very much.
Your opening line, as I mentioned before, is critical. You want to start with a bang. And what do you think is the most common thing that people say when they are going to deliver training or deliver a speech? What do you think is the most common thing that people say? You know, because you've heard it. Imagine you're going into some training. Let's say that you're going into one of those public seminars. You walk in, you sit down, the presenter walks up to the front of the room. What is the most likely thing that they're going to say to open? Good morning, everybody. And then you hear about 5 people say, good morning. And then what do? Come on, you can do better than that. Good morning, everybody. And then the audience tends to say, good morning, so that we can get on from this torture and move along with the presentation. So what I'd like you to do is focus on your opening line so that you can start out with a bang and separate yourself from everybody else who gives speeches or presentations. And here's the key to giving opening lines. You want to make it different from everybody else's. And you want to start out with the theme that you'll be talking about throughout your presentation. Meaning, if you're going to be delivering a motivational speech, the first line out of your mouth should be something that is part of your story, that captures the attention of the audience. If you're going to be delivering business training on, let's say, risk management, the first line out of your mouth should have something to do with risk management. If you're going to be doing a presentation, if you're going to be doing some training on communication skills, the first line out of your mouth should have something to do with communicating. Not a hello, not a good afternoon, not a how is everybody doing today. Those types of lines are for people, say hi to buddy, he's joining us again today. Those types of lines are for people who have not had any communication training, and it tends to show. Don't be one of those people. So for example, let's say that I was giving a motivational keynote. Generally, as part of a motivational keynote, you're going to tell a story. So the first line out of your mouth, remember, should be bang on with the theme of your message. So I may want to open up by saying something along the lines of, it was 1973. I remember it was raining because the windows were all fogged up and I was using my finger to draw pictures in the fog on the window. And if you start off like that, you're just telling the story. What'll happen is people will shut up and go, oh, geez, this has started. What's going on? And you draw them in immediately. So remember, start as if you're right in the middle of your presentation and watch what that does to audience members. For example, let's say that we're giving a presentation on risk management to a group of people who came here to learn more about risk management. I might start out by saying something along the lines of, risk management, a topic we hear a lot about, but know little about. Wouldn't you say that that's true? You could do something like that. If I were to give a presentation on communication skills, let's say that I were giving a training class on communication skills, and I wanted to capture the attention of the audience and let them know we've started, because that's what you're doing with your opening line. You let people know you're starting, not by saying, let's get started or good morning, but by starting with enthusiasm and energy. So if I were giving a class on communication training skills, one of the things that I commonly do is I'll look out into the crowd. People tend to think, are we starting? Are we starting? And I'll find somebody in the crowd and say, John, what do you think today's going to be all about? And if you can start off with a question like that to an audience member, again, watch what happens. People tend to stop and say, oh, gee, we've started. Is he going to call on me next? So however you feel comfortable starting, whether it's a question, whether it's part of a story, whether it's a statement about the material that you'll be delivering, start out as if you are right in the middle of your presentation. You are so comfortable giving presentations that you're not going to warm up the crowd or get people excited or have people stand up and stretch and shake their hands or do things like that. Start out with the same energy that you intend to use throughout your entire presentation, and that is signal enough that you have started. It will draw people in immediately and set you apart as a polished, trained public speaker. And for your closing line, what I recommend is this. Find a spot in your presentation where you're about finished, as you're preparing your presentation. Find a spot where you think, my message is wrapping up. And instead of saying something along the lines of, so to review, yada, 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 or saying things like, so if anybody has any questions after the presentation, yada, 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 instead of wrapping up in a very common way that sets people up for the wrap up, remember what you want to do is leave people wanting more. Leave people with a cliffhanger. Leave people thinking, oh, I could have used more of that. Here's the trick. What you want to do is prepare an ending to your presentation where you transition from facts to emotion, and right when you start to build that emotion, say thank you and stop. For example, let's say that I'm talking about communication skills and I reach a point in my presentation where I think that's going to be the end of it. I plan it so that that's going to be the end of my presentation. And I think, okay, what's one of the theories that I want to punctuate in this particular part of my presentation? It's going to be the end. And let's say that I'm talking about dealing with difficult people. And one of the things that comes to mind is I was talking about a lesson where people were asking me during this lesson, can I do X, Y, Z, or do you think that would be a sign of weakness? And I remember telling them, well, the opposite of weakness isn't strength. The opposite of weakness is love. And so the next time I gave a keynote presentation on that particular topic, I remember that I ended talking about difficult people in that particular situation that we were discussing. And you don't set people up for the end. Remember, you don't set them up. So I was saying, we think too much about whether or not people are perceiving us as strong or weak, when that really should not be the case. Because if we're strong, we're strong. But the opposite of weakness isn't strength. The opposite of weakness is love. Thank you very much. And what I did was, I left people thinking about the concept, and then as they're thinking about it with the emotional side of their brain, because I was talking about love, you pause and you say, thank you very much, or thank you. For example, let's say that I were talking about risk management, not a very emotional topic. When you think you're about to end, I don't know anything about risk management, but I assume that I could say something along the lines of this. Because when it really comes right down to it, risk management isn't about numbers or money. Risk management is about people. Thank you. Or let's say that I were giving a presentation, a motivational speech, and I thought, okay, my message is wrapping up, or I'm planning out, this is where I'm going to wrap up my message, and I'm telling a story. Normally during a motivational speech, most of the story is emotional. So I'm going to choose a place where I'm wrapping it up, and I might say something along these lines. And still to this day, when I'm looking out the window doing dishes and I see a robin nest in the pine tree in my backyard, I still think about those conversations with my grandmother and the lessons that she taught me, not just about how to live, but about how to love. Thank you. So you'll notice that when you're wrapping up your presentation, you want to start using pregnant pauses Remember, we talked about pregnant pauses. Pregnant pauses are simply pauses that are a little bit longer than a regular pause. And while you're delivering your final sentence, pause a couple of times. That gets people more engaged in what you're saying. And simply say, thank you. And that's how you stop. So you might have different ways of opening or closing at times, but if you are about to give a presentation in public, if you're preparing some type of speech or some type of training, and you're nervous, how do I end, how do I begin? That's how you do it. Remember, your opening line is some sentence that gets you right into your presentation so that you start at full speed, and your closing line consists of pauses and then a simple thank you. Remember that people will tend to remember how they felt while you speak. They won't remember everything that you said when you give a presentation, but they'll remember how they felt while they were with you. And if they do remember the actual words that you speak, they are going to be the first words that you say and the last words that you say. And the tips that you just learned are fantastic ways to simply and easily create powerful opening lines and closing lines. And the last strategy that I'd like to share with you today, this is just an introduction, of course, to public speaking, is the index cards. Sometimes I will give a keynote that will last 2 to 3 hours, or sometimes I'll give a presentation that might last 3 days. And people frequently ask me at the end of my presentations, I didn't see you were using any notes or reading from anything. How did you do that for so long off the top of your head? And the way you do it, the way you make it appear is though you're just speaking effortlessly. Because remember that when you are giving a presentation or training or a speech, you want the people to whom you're speaking, the crowd or the audience, you want them to feel as though you're just having a conversation, that you're talking with them. It's you and them. And one of the ways that you can get them to feel that way is by not reading from a speech that's been printed out. That is, again, a very common amateur mistake that people make, is they will print out a speech and basically stand at a podium and read from it. If you can get away without using a podium, way better, because remember that a podium is a barrier. It's a physical barrier. And we talked in one of our first lessons, I think lesson 1 or lesson 2, about removing barriers, barrier removal. And if you can remove any barriers between you and the people with whom you're talking in a training session or during a speech, it's preferable that you do that. So if you can get away without using a podium or without sitting behind a table, do that. If you have to, for whatever reason, stand behind a podium or sit at a table, or if you're standing all by yourself, index cards can help you make it appear as though you're speaking off the top of your head without having to memorize hours or even days worth of material. And what you want to do is grab some index cards. Here's some very simple index cards that I have. And what you always want to do, of course, when you're preparing a speech or delivering training or delivering some type of presentation is know your material. You should not have to read your material. You should know your material, and whatever you keep as reference material for you as you're speaking is simply that, reference material, so that you can keep on track in case you lose your train of thought, which happens to everybody. Keep something around to help get you back on track or to help you remember what you were saying or in what sequence you were saying it, things like that. Index cards are the perfect thing to use for a speech. What you want to do is, I like to buy different colors. So I, for example, here have 4 different colors of index cards. And the way I use them is, if I have, let's say, 4 different main topics that I'll be discussing during a speech, I'll use 4 different colors, one for each topic. I like to, before a speech or a presentation or before training, I like to make an outline. And in that outline, you want to write down, if you have the time to do this, your main points, your subpoints, more main points, more subpoints. So once I have all of my main points of my presentation, or maybe you're giving it in 3 big sections, whatever it may be, however you're dividing up what you're saying, I can use index cards that are color-coded to remind myself, for example, the green ones come first. That's my first main point. Then I'm going to use some yellow ones because that's going to be my second main point. I might use some red ones as my last point. And then I'll write on those index cards my subpoints, any ideas that I want to make sure that I express, big maybe storytelling ideas or hot tips, whatever they may be. I can have, let's say, 5 green cards. Maybe it's I'm going to be delivering a lot of information at the beginning of my speech, and I might have 5 green cards, 2 red cards, 3 yellow cards, whatever it may be. Instead of using paper, write your ideas on index cards, and it's a good idea to write them by hand to make them big. Draw visual cues. For example, if I'm talking about a section in love, I'll draw a big heart next to that. If I'm talking about money, I'll draw a big dollar bill next to that. If I'm talking about relations or relationships, I might draw 2 people next to that. The reason I say that is because if I have the opportunity to set down my index cards, which I frequently do so that it doesn't appear as though I'm reading from them, I can glance down at them and I can be drawn to where I'm supposed to be by easily recognizing visual cues rather than having to read where was I, where was I, where was I, where was I. And I can also hold the index cards in my hands because there's nothing distracting about somebody who's delivering a speech or talking and holding simply index cards. And it's not wrong or it's not distracting or bad to, as you're speaking, look down at your index cards and refresh your memory about where you were, and then you can look back up. I mean, of course, if you stand there and read from your index cards, that's not a good idea. But if you hold them in your hand and you're occasionally looking down, it helps you remember where you were, and you talk some more, and then once you're done expressing the thought that you just reminded yourself of by reading the index card, you look back and you're reminded of the next thought, and then you look back up and you talk about that because you know your material. And then when you're done talking about that thought, you might change your index card and look back and, oh, there's your next thought. And it reminds you what to say because you know your material, and so on and so on. And again, you can set down your index cards, you can hold them in your hand, and this works very well whether you're sitting down during your presentation or standing up. You can easily stand up and hold your index cards, and it gives people who are nervous something to do with their hands. So if you have to give training, presentation, a speech, whatever it may be, and you are nervous about remembering your material, and you're also nervous about what to do with your hands, don't sweat it. Remember, you do have to memorize your opening line and your closing line. You cannot read those from index cards. You have to memorize those. However, all the rest, take it easy, take your time. You're simply having a conversation with the people in front of you, and you can feel free to reference your index cards as you're doing it. It will help you relax and be more confident and powerful when delivering your message. And that is how you use index cards. And now I'd like to talk about our danger phrases and power phrases for the week.
Stop using danger phrases. We're gonna give you the power.
Our first 2 danger phrases are for home, and they are, I don't want to talk about yada, yada, yada. I don't want to talk about it. There are some times where it's appropriate to say, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Sometimes. However, when somebody asks you a question and it's somebody that you have a relationship with that's close to you, maybe it's your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your children, instead of simply saying, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't want to talk about him, I don't want to talk about that relationship, which tends to aggravate people and put them off and actually make them want to talk about it even more, the next time that happens to you, instead try saying something along the lines of, I prefer to keep that private. Can you respect that? Because when you simply say to somebody, I prefer to keep that private, that is honest. And that is something that most people can relate to, wanting a sense of privacy. And when you follow it up with, can you respect that? Most people, when you ask them, can you respect XYZ, want to say yes. And so instead of saying something abrasive or confrontational that actually creates suspicion in other people, such as, I don't want to talk about XYZ. I don't want to talk about that situation. I don't want to talk about that relationship. If you instead turn it into something personal to you, which it is, and simply say, I prefer to keep that personal. Can you respect that? Or, that's something that I still would like to keep personal. Can you respect that for now? That is something that most people will relate to, and without being offended or aggravated, are more likely to say, oh, absolutely. And then you've just gotten what you want. You've kept it personal, and you've helped strengthen your relationship rather than causing a rift in it. The next danger phrase for home is, why didn't you tell me? We tend to say to people, once we've discovered something, things along the lines of, why didn't you tell me that that was going on? Why didn't you tell me that you had that problem? Why didn't you come to me with that? And that really doesn't serve us. It's not something that's going to offend somebody or make them angry, but that doesn't serve us. It's basically wasted words. And you know,
These free effective communication skills training course videos brought to you by communication expert keynote speaker Dan O'Connor.
DanO'ConnorTraining.com. Dan O'Connor.